Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next City of Echoes chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 41 and 42. So we'll jump straight in here. So at the start of this chapter, what happens is that kind of Susu and Jin and Xuan kind of fill each other in on kind of parts of their stories that they don't really kind of know about. So obviously Susu has lots of gaps in her memories. They try to bring her up to speed on that. She tells them effectively, I suppose, what officially they've been kind of charged with, so they have a little bit more context for what their situation is being held in prison. But that is the status of everyone at the start of this chapter, is that big moment, Susu gets her memories back, but they're still all in situations where they're not really free to leave together, because Susu has to go back to being one of the Judees, and Jin and Xuan are still in prison awaiting trial, effectively. And yeah, they've been charged with a serious crime of attempting to assassinate the Supreme Administrator. They have to wait their turn to be seen by the judges for their punishment. They do find out there have been other uprisings, other rebellions against the invaders in and out of the city. But this is when their day of judgment then arrives. And Jin is going into this feeling quite confident because she's got this major win of she has Susu back, and she feels, even though it's going to be complicated, the other stuff is just going to work out. So we get the whole kind of situation where they're brought in by guards, they're Dai Li guards, kind of as they're brought to what is revealed to be the guest wing of the palace. And they are finally brought in front of, I suppose, the person who has sort of like facilitated their capture, the person who quote unquote has betrayed them, and it's revealed to be Aunt Sumi. So one of the heads of the Silver Fangs is the person behind this, effectively, and it's revealed here she's wearing the emblem of the Dai Li. Xuan immediately is like, I suspected Patron Wu, but it was actually you all along. Now, of course, as we go through these two chapters, we find out that this is not actually the case, but we have to go through the reveal for Jin and Xuan about they don't know the greater story kind of happening here. From their perspective right now, they feel they have been betrayed by someone they've kind of worked for quite a while. They think Aunt Sumi has effectively betrayed the entire Earth Kingdom to side with like the Fire Nation and the bad Dai Li, of course. So this is where they begin to kind of like argue kind of back and forth a little bit, but Aunt Sumi's kind of very calm in the situation, and it's just kind of like what they tell Xuan to watch his mouth, and she's just like, yeah, never mind that, and she points to Jin and is like, you, the newcomer, it seems like once you appeared, the younger ones got braver, more daring. We could use more people like you. And again, she's talking about them in a weird way where like it doesn't come across like you're treating us like prisoners. What's actually kind of happening here? She then says to the other guards, like, I will question these prisoners myself. She tells two of the agents to stay there. The others go. And they follow her, kind of highlighting how high up she actually is in all of this. And she then makes it quite comfortable for them and is basically like, hey, before you two start going off and kind of insulting me, save your words for her. And then who walks into the room but Dr. Jan? So this is Xuan's mother walks into the room and kind of immediately kind of grabs hold of him in a hug. What happened to you? Your arm, your face? Because she sees him all kind of like beaten up. And he is very emotional because he didn't know if his mother was safe or not, because she was just taken away from the apothecary early on in the invasion. He was convinced that like she might have been killed. So it's a pretty emotional kind of reunion here. But obviously then there's this other angle of betrayal still happening in the middle of all of this. So we'll tell you everything, you too, Jin. They immediately start questioning those two, but and like, hey, what sort of wild plot did you get yourself involved in? Infiltrating the palace, trying to kidnap one of the Judees. And there's a bit of an argument here about like, really, mother? Like, you want to talk about secrets? Like, why didn't you tell me that you're actually like okay in the palace, kind of in on things ultimately? And you begin to see kind of what's happening here is that because in a way everyone's kept things a secret from each other, they don't really know about the kind of more personal mission that Jin and Xuan have kind of been doing for the last while. And then, of course, Jin and Schwen don't really know what Dr. Jan and Onsumi have been doing in the meantime. And there's a lot of reveals that are kind of going to have to happen here. And as we kind of find out here is that the reality is they haven't been betrayed. Actually, this is the ultimate stage of like the Silver Fang's plan, in that there was never going to be any stopping the Fire Nation invasion kind of once it happened. So in a way, the approach is, do the Silver Fangs immediately attempt to fight back but then get immediately put down, or do they infiltrate the infiltrators and kind of become part of that, act like they've almost betrayed everyone, but actually they're preparing for the future, and they had to keep those secrets from even some of their allies here, and that's what's actually happening here. Now, to get to that, they tried to explain, there are grander schemes operating within the city, things that will put you in danger if you were to know them. I had to keep you safe. And of course, Schwen is really annoyed about this. You left us to wonder if you are dead about this. Jin is actually the one to kind of go over to him to kind of calm him down. But she does kind of say, trust me, my son, I wish I could have told you, but you are right. We should have trusted you more. And then Natsumi finally gets to the point of like, here's the actual truth of the situation. Everyone must play a part if we are to reclaim the city. But they're like, wait, but you're working for the Dai Li. Like, you're responsible for them being here. And so there's a real need for the actual explanation to come out here. So then we get the interesting line. Onsumi says, do you know how to play Pai Sho? Now, it's revealed by Jin that she doesn't really know how to do this. Like, this sort of strategy is not really her kind of thing. But she's heard about the game. She knows what it's kind of roughly about, ultimately. And the discussion here is effectively just this idea, the way the pieces, they can work harmoniously with each other, but they can clash. But that's a simple understanding of the game. And she suddenly takes out a piece. They'll be revealed in about a page's time. But then she talks about the idea that pieces that clash with each other can work together to create a greater harmony on the board, depending on the pattern your opponent is trying to create. A piece can serve multiple purposes in the hand of a Pai Sho master. So Schwen figures out what she's trying to get at here. Not all Dai Li agents serve the Fire Nation, and this is the truth. What she says is, if you only focus on tending your garden, you won't be aware of the threat that is growing elsewhere. Gardens can bloom and fade, gates can open and shut. You have to see the entirety of the board to know what's coming. She continues and kind of gets across the idea that, in the city, you can't see out of it, but the Silver Fangs deal with information in and outside of the walls. And here's the truth finally coming out here. If we throw ourselves immediately into the fray, we reveal our hand too early and risk being burned. We have to assess the layout of the garden, the positioning of our enemies, and wait for the most strategic time to strike. And then she puts the piece down, and it's revealed to be a white lotus tile. And so this is the reveal about the kind of core of the Silver Fangs, is that at least one of the people who runs the Silver Fangs, Onsumi, is, I guess, a member of the White Lotus. And this is why she's talking so much about Pai Sho here. This is why there is this kind of organization that kind of keeps the lower ring together, and why they've been so strategic in handling the kind of Fire Nation invasion effectively. That, yeah, this does make sense, like I was talking about earlier, the idea that, the city was going to fall. The organization would not have been able to counter it at that point in time because it happened so suddenly. So instead, let's, wait, assess the information, and find the correct time to strike back. Which, of course, we know is kind of coming up with the finale of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Sozin's Comet. And that's kind of going to be what we build towards. So this is the reveal that, they haven't been betrayed. That the only reason kind of Jin and Schwen were pretty much captured was because in trying to keep their kind of deep undercover situation going on, of course, them, unaware of the separate mission that Jin and Schwen were doing, captured people who were doing stuff against the role that they're meant to be kind of fulfilling. And it's just this kind of lack of communication effectively between the two groups that's kind of ended up happening here. So that's the fascinating, interesting reveal. The White Lotus thing, I don't think there's any obvious suggestion prior to this about the White Lotus. There's definitely a sense that there's something deeper going on, and especially if you more heavily analyze a lot of the earlier scenes surrounding like the Professor delivery and the Makmu Ling stuff. Okay, there's something going on here. Like philosophy is clearly part of whatever this organization really is. There's more to this than it just being a gang trying to do good. So the White Lotus makes sense. I'm not sure if it's one where you can super heavily predict it beforehand. I think it's more in retrospect that you realize that, like, okay, there was kind of some setup towards this. But it then immediately makes you question, like, okay, who is White Lotus, who isn't White Lotus? Like, okay, Aunt Sumi's White Lotus. Is Patron Wu White Lotus? And then what does that say about, like, say, Professor or Makmu Ling? Is Makmu Ling White Lotus? Because again, they pointed out that her headdress is a lotus kind of going on. So it's interesting. I think there'll be a reveal as the chapters kind of progress here, that they kind of get across the idea that the idea in a way of the White Lotus and kind of what it means, the almost like ancient aspect of the order, like, is known within the Earth Kingdom, and they remember kind of what it means, and this is why, like, everyone sort of is aware of kind of the significance of it without being part of it. But you know, we'll go forward here. We'll learn bits and pieces more about this now that it's finally out in the open. Everything Aunt Sumi says is kind of like, okay, from the perspective of White Lotus, what does that actually mean? But that is just chapter 41. So moving into 42. This is where they are then brought up to speed on the greater kind of landscape of the world. That, hey, here's information that's been kept from citizens even under Fire Nation control. So we find out that Omashu has been pulled out of Fire Nation control because, again, we're past the eclipse. So we know that Bumi has actually freed Omashu. So that's really cool. There are pockets of rebel forces around the Earth Kingdom strategically taking out Fire Nation caravans and food sources, striking at them where it hurts. And Jin notes that this sounds familiar to the efforts of Smellerby and Longshot's freedom fighters, but on a much larger scale. Dr. Jan even notes others used the eclipse to try and take advantage. There was a coordinated attack on the Fire Nation capital, but those efforts failed. So that's the invasion that we saw in ATLA, of course, the two-parter. But Ansumi's like, we will fight back. We will not rest until the Earth Kingdom is free from their grasp. So that's the situation there. So what are they actually going to do? What is the plan to try and get the Earth Kingdom back? They note to Jin, we can use you in the coming days. The Silverfangs are currently pretending to be subdued. There is a time coming where we will need the help in resuming those connections. But we need you to return to the city to make sure that the people do not give up. And then, you know, facilitate communicating when the time is right. So they kind of highlight that, look, we're going to get you two out of the city. We can do that. We can coordinate a way to get you out. So that's the kind of situation there. They're kind of careful about, like, we'll tell you at the right time what the secret message basically is, but like, we're going to be really, really careful about it overall. Ansumi even noting that, like, us Earth Kingdom folk are good at pretending to be working on one thing while accomplishing something else. So then we address the kind of almost elephant in the room here, which is that, okay, they're doing what they can to get Jin and Xuen out, but Jin's not going anywhere without Susu, and she says as much. It's the reason I'm here. I'm not leaving unless we kind of get her out too, basically. And they just kind of note that, like, okay, you'll be given one chance to leave. If you take it, it's up to you. And they just kind of leave it as a bit of a kind of mystery as to how they're going to also facilitate getting Susu out as well. Xuen and his mother have a bit of a scene as kind of Jin goes off on her own. And when he comes back, he does reveal that, like, he made it clear to his mother that the Susu thing is kind of non-negotiable. But that, yeah, if we can get her to the escape route, they can kind of leave together. That's the whole idea there. The two of them, Jin and Xuan, have a little bit of a moment. She kind of kisses him, kind of thanking him for everything. And that, like, okay, there's hope here. They're going to make their way back into the city and stuff will happen from here. But yeah, the next time Susu arrives, she's informed that they're going to leave the palace soon. Susu gives them other kind of key information about what she knows from her relatively high position. We get the very interesting detail of how the Dai Li are handling the kind of regular brainwashing that's needed to keep the Judies as Judies. With Lake Laogai out of commission, actually they're being sent for rejuvenation at a spa located in the upper ring, known for specialty treatments. So that's a bit of an interesting one. I'm wondering, is that maybe the one from the Tale of Toph? Toph and Katara? Or is that just a separate spa? I'm not sure if that's the obvious connection that they're making there. But either way, they've had to change the location of where they do the brainwashing, and now this is the cover story for it, is that they go for spa treatments and it's actually the brainwashing that's happening. Susu notes that there is an appointment in her calendar for next week, which is where she assumes she's going to have the brainwashing kind of done again on her. So they have to act quickly. There's no waiting for the next opportunity. It has to be now. So then, over the following days, they continue to kind of work together on the, feeding as much information as they can to each other. Susu reveals that the whole supreme bureaucratic administrator position is just a figurehead position. It's just to be a visual for people to see the kind of pronouncements coming from, but there's no real power there. They even note that the decisions are made elsewhere, likely another nation entirely, coming from the Fire Nation, of course. So they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and eventually someone appears at the cell and gives them kitchen uniforms and also some Dai Li rock beads, so they have some earth to kind of bend with. And this is where the chapter ends, with the idea that we're about to head into the next kind of action sequence, which is the sneaking out of effectively the palace and the upper ring and getting back to the lower ring, so they can effectively attempt to facilitate communication among the lower ring again, use the kind of Silver Fang connections in the lower ring to bring it together for the right moment to strike back. And so you can see what we're kind of setting up here is that while we followed our main characters doing the big events of the finale, this is the kind of other part of things, that like a whole city was taken back, and it wasn't really just by a couple of individuals. It was also the people coming together, the people rising up at key moments, and we're going to see that fleshed out here, because in a way, thematically, that's kind of what this whole book has been about, is really delving deep into how Ba Sing Se works, specifically the lower ring, and we're kind of fleshing that out quite heavily here. So that's where the chapter ends. I think two really good chapters. 41, I think especially, is quite good because it's such a surprising chapter where you get the whiplash of betrayal by Aunt Sumi, but then the gradual explanation of like, oh no, we haven't betrayed you, it just looks that way. That's how we're secretly in the middle of all the action and have the information to potentially counter-strike with. And then the White Lotus reveal is so cool to have, especially as they're going to use it kind of as we go forward. Because again, who takes back Ba Sing Se? Who's ultimately responsible for it? It's the White Lotus. The Grand Lotuses kind of all come together, and it's facilitated in addition to what Aunt Sumi is basically facilitating here. That's really cool to just highlight that, yeah, the White Lotus is more than just that group of old masters doing a lot of the fighting. There's other stuff going on as well with the more influence side of the White Lotus that they have through the Silver Fangs, which of course that's the big reveal from these chapters, is that the Silver Fangs is kind of run at least by a White Lotus kind of person. I'm interested to follow the rest of the chapters because I forget some of the exact details of like if they ever confirm who is and isn't White Lotus. I don't think they go into particular depth on it, but it's a very cool reveal. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on both of these chapters, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.